Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all that's about DDLG and Ageplay. I actually had the opportunity over this last weekend to go to a 3-day long kink and BDSM convention, which is just so amazing. There were so many classes and discussion groups and play parties, and it was just so awesome. And one of those classes I got to take was actually about Ageplay, and I know that you guys responded really well to my last video, which made me so excited. I am not actually into DDLG or anything like that myself, so it was really helpful to be able to take a class, and I just have so many notes and just so much that I learned during all of the classes, and I thought it would be really great to be able to relay that information to you all because, again, it's not really something I'm into myself. And the thing that I want to cover in this video specifically is I want to talk more about the differences between DDLG and Ageplay. I also want to go over different sort of dynamics you can have within a DDLG or Ageplay relationship, different kinds of scenes that you might have, and different kinds of roles that a top or a bottom could take on. And of course, this also means we're going to be talking about different kinds of activities that you could do as an age player, as somebody who is part of a DDLG relationship, or someone who identifies as a little. I'm also going to be making another video later this week that is going to be about specifically dark age play, something that sort of changes the result of taking these classes over that 3-day weekend, was that I sort of have a more refined view on all of this. People who participate in DDLG, while they don't age regress, they tend to have a very specific range of ages that they act most like, even if they don't necessarily identify as a specific number within that range. So usually people who participate in DDLG specifically are somewhere between, let's say, 4 and 10. Whereas people who are age players regress to any number of ages, because the idea of being an age player isn't necessarily just regressing in age, it's acting as any age other than the one you biologically are. So for example, somebody who is a 25-year-old dom pretending to be a 47-year-old uncle would also technically be age playing, even though they're not actually age regressing. And additionally, with age play, people who participate in DDLG or identify as littles, while they can participate in things like diaper kink and wear diapers, it is more common with people who participate in age play specifically to be somewhere between the ages of, say, infancy and 3 years old than somebody who participates in DDLG. A lot of people who participate in DDLG and identify as littles attach to it as a very specific personal identifier. Being a little is very important to their sense of self. It's definitely who they are at the core of their person. They are a little. And I feel very similarly about my identification as a pet. I feel very strongly that being a pet, being a service submissive is very much to the core of my being. It's very important to me, and it's part of something that I self-identify as. Whereas somebody who is an age player, regardless of if they are or aren't into BDSM or into any other kinds of kinks, it's something maybe that they do every day with their partner, maybe once every week, and yeah, they enjoy age play, but it's not necessarily something that they consider a personal identifier. It's just something that they happen to enjoy. But all of that being said, and all of our differences, there are a lot of overlap between these two communities. There are people who are into DDLG who age regress. There are people who age regress who are into DDLG. It's a big old Venn diagram, and regardless of which one you feel best defines what your relationship is like or is the kind of relationship you would want to be in, there are a lot of overlap in terms of the kinds of scenes you can have, in terms of the kinds of structures you can have in your relationships, and in terms of the kinds of roles that you can have as somebody who's an age player or somebody who is into DDLG. So the first type of roles that I want to talk about are going to be the roles for sort of the younger player in the scene. Now keep in mind, when it comes to a scene that involves age play, you don't necessarily need to have an age differential between the two people participating. You could have two people who are the same age. You could have two people who are both teenagers. Maybe one's a freshman and one's a senior. So don't think of it necessarily as being constrained to just like a elementary schooler and like her father or something like that. There is a wide variety. Although when it comes specifically to the younger person in the scene, the roles tend to be a bit more restricted just because of the fact that kids are less formed and they have less identifiers specific to them, whereas an adult, which we'll talk about in a moment, has a wide variety of different roles that they can take on based on their occupation and their age and things like that. So very often with the younger person in the scene, you'll see things like being a schoolgirl, being a kid on a bus, being a toddler who's left at daycare, being an infant with a nanny, being a college student, being a teenager learning how to drive for the first time, being somebody who has been naughty and has to be in the corner or got locked in the closet. Generally, they tend to be based more in what school year you're in or how old you are specifically. There tends to be more of a specific age range and a very set role based around what age you are if you are the younger person in the scene. Whereas, again, with adults, I'll talk about in a second, you can participate in a role, but what age you play as can vary a lot and can alter the dynamic and the feeling of that scene. Now, when it comes to adult roles, there are just so much variety out there. And of course, I know a lot of people really enjoy sort of doing the elementary schooler with like her father sort of dynamic. And if that's what you like, that's fine. But adults have so much variety to what they can do, what they can bring to the scene, especially if they are the top. And that can really sort of change the flavor of what's actually happening. So yes, you could be the mommy or the daddy. You could be the step parent. You could be an adoptive parent. You could be the aunt or the uncle. You could be a grandparent. You could be any number of extended family members. You could be a doctor, a school teacher, a bus driver. You could be the janitor. You could be their school counselor. You could be a priest. You could be any sort of number of really dark things, which again, I'm not going to really get into in this video, but you could be like a kidnapper. You could be somebody trying to help them out because they're lost at the grocery store. You could be an attendant at a daycare. You could be a nanny. You could be really just anything you want to be as an adult. They probably interact with kids at some point. Now, before I talk about sort of specific scene ideas and specific scene dynamics, I kind of want to go over sort of the overarching different kinds of scene categories there are. Again, these are not necessarily hard and fast rules. You could have a mix of these different elements within one scene, and that's perfectly fine. Or maybe you do something in your scenes that I'm not even going to mention in this list, and that's also totally fine as well. Sort of the big thing that comes up, especially with people who are into DDLG, is very casual, non-sexual play, and that is sort of, I think, is the type of play I'd recommend most for people who are interested in starting age play. So it's things like coloring, playing video games, having dinner as, you know, a kid would. You could have things like going shopping, playing with Legos. You could be playing outside in the woods or at a playground or something like that. But really anything that's non-sexual that you might be doing with a child would be considered a non-sexual type of scene. The next level up from that would be things like body care and grooming. Specifically, I'm talking about things like showering, bathing, having your hair done, having your hair brushed, getting dressed, having your teeth brushed even. Anything you might do to help a kid get prepared who doesn't necessarily have the fine motor abilities yet to actually get ready themselves and make decisions about, say, the kind of clothing they're going to wear that day. You can also have any of a number of different kinds of sexual scenes. And again, I'm going to kind of save most of this topic for the dark age play video because I know a lot of people are very adamantly against sexual age play and sexual DDLG, but it does exist. You could have solo scenes like you're a kid and it's the first time you're masturbating, which is probably kind of the only scene I can really think of that would work specifically for a solo sex scene when it comes to age play, but it is an option. There's also a lot of different kinds of consensual sort of sexual scenes. So let's say it's like between siblings and it's like an incest is okay kind of thing. There's also, of course, coerced and forced sexual scenes, which again, I'm exclusively going to leave for the dark age play video. So, you know, if you want to see that and hear about it, stick around. It'll be up later this week. There's one thing that I want to talk about before I get into really discussing different kinds of scenes ideas and different kinds of activities you can do. And that is, a lot of times people assume that the person who is playing as the younger aged character in the scene has to be the bottom, and that's just not true at all. There are plenty of times, especially in real life, where the person who's younger is actually really the one in charge. Hasn't anybody ever had like a really bossy younger sibling or younger cousin? You could also have it to be where maybe the person is a very princessy brat and they're actually the ones who are topping, and not in a topping from the bottom kind of way, just a pre-negotiated, the one who is the princess little girl or the like prince little boy is going to be the one who's bossing around the parent or the nanny or the grandparent or whatever it is. And remember how I said age play doesn't necessarily involve power exchange and doesn't necessarily involve kink? Well, a great way to do that is a solo scene. So, for example, you could be by yourself having nap time. If you're old enough, maybe you're giving yourself a bath. Maybe you're a naughty kid who's having his first time when his parents are away from home and he's going to get up to some trouble. Maybe you're just watching cartoons. Maybe you're quietly coloring. Maybe you are like a kid who's pretending that they're like alone at lunchtime in elementary school or something like that. You can really take it to any sort of level and place you want, but there are a lot of different ways out there that you can have solo scenes by yourself if you don't have a partner to do it with, or you just want to have some nice quality alone time. The sort of classic dynamic that happens in age play and DDLG is the single adult with the single kid. Now, like I talked about earlier, this doesn't necessarily mean that the adult is the one in charge. Again, you could have the princess and her daddy who's going out maybe shopping to get her some presents, and she's just like running over the top of him and like putting all the stuff in her car and begging for daddy to buy her everything. You could maybe have it where it's a kid with a nanny. Maybe a kid is going to the doctor's office for the first time. Maybe they're getting a sports physical at school. Maybe they are in class and they get pulled away and taken aside by the teacher to be disciplined. Maybe they're getting called to the principal's office. Maybe they are a kid getting picked up from school by their parents. Maybe they are just at home alone with their parent and they're doing some of the sort of activities that you would do in like a solo kid scene and the adult is just sort of getting ready in the background. You could have a scene where the parent is feeding you or providing you with food or making you meals or something like that. Maybe you're a kid who got lost in a store and is looking for their parent. Maybe it's a scene between a kid and a priest or a nun or some other member of the clergy. Maybe it's somebody with an uncle or a grandparent. Maybe it's like a younger sibling and their older sibling, and the older sibling has been forced to babysit. Really, there's a lot of different kinds of adult and single kid sort of dynamics out there. There are also, of course, lots of dynamics where it's actually two kids playing together, and this is where it gets interesting. You could have things where it's two cousins. Maybe it's two schoolgirls together and one of them is like the bad influence. They're trying to like get the other kid to try smoking or like, do lesbian kissing or something like that for the first time. Maybe it's a kid and a puppy playing, or maybe it's a girl and her pony and she's taking care of the pony. This would also be a really great example of a time when maybe the kid is actually the top in the scene because the pony is really the one who's being submissive or being the bottom in the scene. Maybe two kids are playing together at daycare. Maybe they're going on a zoo trip. Maybe they both went together to go to the doctor's office. Maybe they're two best friends and they're building a fort together at home or at school or somewhere like that. Maybe it's two kids who have snuck into a movie theater after they skipped class. Maybe it's a pair of twins who really don't get along with each other. Maybe you're just playing a board game together. You could also be participating in sports. Although, again, once you start getting up into like really large groups of age players, that's when things can get really interesting because you're bringing in so many different personalities. It can actually be like being in a real classroom or being on a real sports team. And as many of us probably remember from our own younger days, there are plenty of situations where it's one kid and a lot of adults. So maybe you're having a family holiday. Maybe you're at a family reunion. Maybe you did get lost in the store and you can't find your parent, or you're just surrounded by all these adults who are panicked and trying to help you find your mom. Maybe they're going on a camping trip. Maybe they're going out to have a barbecue or some other kind of family outing. Maybe they're at a doctor's office and there's a bunch of different nurses and doctors who are all trying to poke and prod them and figure out what's going on. And after you have a scene or after you've established a dynamic, take time afterwards to talk specifically about what happened in the scene. When you're first starting to play with somebody, you're starting to learn your dynamic with them, it's very important that you have those times, that way you can figure out what worked and what didn't. Especially, again, when it comes to age play, because there are a lot of very touchy things that happen in people's past that maybe they don't even remember until the scene actually happens, then suddenly it brings up something they had forgotten about for years. Maybe something just kind of felt weird and you want to talk about what that was, or maybe something was completely and totally awesome and you want to make sure you do it like all the time, forever and always. But again, just talking and communicating, so very important. And that's really all I have to talk about in this video. Again, I am going to be having a video later this week that's going to be specifically about dark age play. So if you want to stick around and watch that, I will link it down below when it's out. You can also subscribe. I do make videos twice a week. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until I see you next, have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.